Well, he flies around the world from Hong Kong to San Francisco, distributing all the things from Berlin down to Cape Town, wearing different shirts and launching AZs in Jakarta. Tell me where in the world is pushing database migrations, making Oracle cry uncle from Athena to Redshift. He'll be slinging schemas, going out to dinner, sitting at Dynamo Global tables. Tell me where in the world is he speaks in New York, in London, Boston, in Las Vegas, Jakarta, to Papua New Guinea, and back. Well, he'll snub Route 53, claim it's not a database service. I'm sorry, but he's wrong. I don't care that he's a doctor. He drops a syllable from Amy.
It's AMI!
But he can slide. He's Werner. Tell me where in the world is. Oh, tell me where in the world is. Where is he next? Osaka to Frankfurt, Milan via Amsterdam, Mumbai to Dublin, Ohio,
Sao Paulo!
well, he trots around the globe and he's dropping bombs of knowledge. Then parties really hard with a taste for EDM and house, saying encrypt everything and secure your S3 buckets. Please tell me where in the world is. Where in the world is. Where in the world is. Where in the world is.
Back to Vegas!
Where in the world is.
What shirt will he
Where
wear?
in the world is.
Encrypt everything!
Apparently this year, the answer to that question is he's speaking in, of all places, bit of a lag there. Yeah, he's speaking this year in a sugar factory in an undisclosed location somewhere in Amsterdam. Let's start off at the very beginning, now that we've resolved our technical challenges. Who are you?
So I'm Divanny Lamas. I'm the CEO of Transposit.
Yes, you're also apparently a managing partner at a VC firm as well, right?
Yes, I'm a managing director at Sutter Hill Ventures.
Okay, so you're a VC, you're a CEO, any other parts of the alphabet you're looking to conquer in the near future, or is that mostly it for now?
I mean, I'm a baker. I can keep going, but I think that's good to start with.
Excellent. Okay, so I do want to point out just a fun thing here, that when we were setting up this Twitch stream before all of this nonsense began, they would not let us put the name of the company, Transposit, in the stream title. I don't know if it's an incredibly greedy regular expression for trans, and if so, if that's its own problem in its own right, but that was interesting, and I just want to call out, you do in fact work for Transposit. Thank you for your support of my ridiculous nonsense. So the first thing that Werner announced was that it's not a typical keynote. And he wandered and took us on a walking/biking tour of the Netherlands, Amsterdam specifically. What was your take on that?
I mean, it reminded me of the last time I was there and, made me wish that I was on a beautiful bike, just biking around the canals.
One of the fun parts of looking at this through the lens of pandemic, all the fun parts of the pandemic, which is, there are countless lists of those out there. But one thing that surprised me that we haven't seen more of is videos like this, where, okay, people are trapped in a bunch of different places and they're doing their level best to make it look like a boring keynote. Here's a stage with a box on it. It makes it look like there's a crowd. We fake it. It becomes this ersatz version of a actual keynote instead of focusing on there's an opportunity here to do something else, to do something great. And they don't seem to pick up on that nearly as much as I would hope that they would.
I think that they're trying. It's hard to take the traditional keynote approach and put it into this format. But yeah, I feel like they had this opportunity to talk about this massive transformation that we're going through. And, Werner made a small nod to it, but then I think just kind of started going back into the same set of announcements that he always does. So I agree in being a little bit underwhelmed on that side.
So I'm curious as to the announcements they came out with. They started with Cloud Shell, which is something people have been asking for a long time. I just riffed about it a little bit during our technical difficulties stint, but I'm curious as to your thoughts on it.
Oh, I mean, I love it. I think that one of the really interesting things to me is that it feels like AWS is basically trying to control, every step of everyone's journey in coding from like day one when they first pick up a shell for the first time and start typing and trying things out and simplifying that experience and presumably getting people hooked. So, it reminded me of when I was in college and kind of kept trying to keep server access for a lot longer than I should have, just because I wanted to avoid setting up my own server and managing a server and all of those other pieces. And the fact that you could just get that access for free now, wherever you are, is pretty damn exciting. So out of all of the announcements today, I think that was one of the ones that I was the most excited about, just because of the simplicity that brings to new developers.
Oh, absolutely. For my take, I came up through the space by running servers. That was the thing I knew how to do. Writing code, or please. On a good day, I can read some of it and sort of a vague understanding what some of those words mean. But for me, running the server was never the technically hard part of it, because that was the functional role. But it's always been a problem of where do I park the development box, the Bastion host, the bounce box, the thing that I wind up doing most of my work on, because you probably don't want that to be in production. It's almost as exposed as the CI/CD box. That becomes a bit of a problem. And you don't want to fall into a trap of having sensitive information living there. The fact that this now is all in a managed environment you don't have to worry about, that has a persistent 1 gig of storage that you can bring back, that's kind of neat. I'm curious to actually get access to it and see how I can, first, use it to wind up improving workflows. Second, start using it to teach other people about AWS without jumping through the hurdles of getting them into the system. And of course, third, how I can misuse Cloud Shell as a database.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people, it's going to be interesting to see how people actually try it out and what they end up doing with it. I can imagine all sorts of things, but ultimately, here was my big trend for Werner's entire talk that I found really interesting. A lot of people, I think, share your sentiment from, I know when I started working in tech and working on the vendor side, there was this belief that the developer side was what was going to be really difficult. And what I keep hearing is that all of these operations pieces, getting policies right, getting all the configuration right, getting all of those types of steps right, are really what's overwhelming people these days. And I found it really interesting that so much of Werner's entire keynote was focused on ops and focused on simplifying ops and reducing operational complexity for all of these users of infrastructure and making it like the Lego story. I think to me was super interesting. To your point, I think a lot of times it feels a little bit disheartening to companies when they hear stories of companies that are moving towards serverless models and really modernizing their infrastructure. But kind of Lego shows how it can be done even when it's going through transformation, and things like Cloud Shell and, kind of the on-demand access to all of these different resources, I think are really just changing the game to me, really changing the game and how do people interact and think about ops going forward.
It's nice as someone coming from an ops background to see that it's not just the coders and the application developers that are the focus of these things. It's nice to say, oh, they remembered me, which is kind of exciting and ridiculous because I'm noisy. AWS always remembers me, usually when they wake up at 2 a.m. screaming after a nightmare. But it's nice to see that they're starting to focus more on that. And I do want to talk about a release from previous weeks because it does align in some ways spiritually with what Transposit does, specifically Devops Guru. I took advantage of a related release to kick the tires on Code Guru, and now that it supports Python, ran a bunch of my garbage code through it, and it found absolutely nothing. How do I frame this politely? Highly skeptical at the entire premise that AI, or I guess machine learning or heuristic management, is going to do an effective job of pinpointing more errors in production than the false flags that it winds up sending up, to a point where, almost like the voice assistants with the Siris and the Alexas of the world, whenever they don't do something well, you feel like an idiot for asking. And I feel like that's the problem you see with a lot of ML applications. I'm curious, given that your entire company focuses on providing insight into outages and live runbooks, it's clear that you disagree on some level with those premises. Fight me.
Yeah. I actually think we'll probably look into ways of leveraging, Devops Guru and some of the insights that they're providing, because I think that there's obviously a place for machine learning and for data analysis in modern operations. That said, we're big believers in a human in the loop approach. We think that, if you look at these infrastructures, and Werner kept saying this, they're like way too complicated, right? Like they're too much for any one person to understand. That doesn't mean that you can completely remove the humans from the process. So I think that there's a time and a place for those types of insights, but I've run my really awful code through some of those systems before that try to give me recommendations. And, what they failed to tell me is that I may have gotten the syntax right, but I missed, the efficiency side, or I missed, the actual purpose of what I was trying to do in the first place. And I think systems like, I'll be curious to see how Devops Guru actually plays out in practice, but I think a lot of those systems tend to suffer from the same issues, which is they might be able to tell you where there's a configuration mismatch, but that doesn't mean that they can tell you, when there are issues between two different components in your infrastructure that are conflicting with each other, and how you might go about resolving that. Or they might be able to give you the guidance, but that doesn't mean that it's integrated into your own environment. So we're still going to need humans that have intuition, humans that have much broader context and systems in order to be able to guide these machines for a very long time. And systems that enable the humans to effectively interact with that data and effectively act on that data and drive action on that data, I think are still really, really critical. And I don't think AWS is going to put us out of business on that side anytime soon.
No, it seems like on some level, the company they really want to put out of business this year is Datadog, or frankly, all of the monitoring / don't call us monitoring, we're observability vendors. How do I put this politely? I'm skeptical, a little bit skeptical, just because I don't necessarily know that I or anyone else is going to be too quick to trust the company that can't update its dashboard in a reasonable way, in a reasonable time frame, to tell us when one of our applications is having problems. There's something to be said for a third party who focuses on that competency and only that competency being the way to go. I think that there are a lot of services companies can make that are aligned with where AWS is going. And in the fullness of time, they're not as likely to have a business story that resonates because AWS is going to solve so much of this. I don't think that monitoring is going to be one of those things, because the open secret of all the providers is that they all use each other's stuff to keep an eye on their own things, because what if the only thing that's working on your entire environment is the thing that gives you the thumbs up and says, we're fine? There has to be something else, a sort of a neutral observation platform. And for better or worse, we've seen AWS's first attempt at all of this. Does anyone like CloudWatch? Anyone at all?
Checks and balances matter, and hybrid is a thing. People aren't, as much as we want to believe, like you can believe cloud all you want, but everyone isn't going to be in cloud all at once. I found the part I think that for me was, kind of exciting. The open telemetry announcements are exciting. It's exciting that they're making it easier for people to get data from, kind of all of their infrastructure over into their observability tools without having to manage a fleet of agents. That said, people still have on-prem stuff. They still have devices at the edge, and getting things from, getting data from those different systems into one location still matters. And to your point, do I really want to go all in on everything AWS, or is it nice sometimes to be able to blame another vendor and to go to another vendor to tell me how AWS is doing? I also think that, AWS has shown again and again that they'll take the rough idea of what a service is doing. And I was at Splunk for 8 years, so I went through this like the reinvent kind of heart attack every single year where, you just kind of like go and wait to see what part of your business or maybe the entire business reinvent is, going to announce they're going to destroy this year for your company. And, I remember the first time that they came in and they started announcing that they were going to kill Splunk. And then they've been saying that for the last, 5-6 years, every single year, like clockwork. And yet, Splunk is still a thing. Datadog is still a thing. AppDynamics is still a thing. New Relic is still a thing. Honeycomb is still, out there, like actually defining observability and pioneering it for people. So I love the idea of there being more vendors and more, options for buyers. That's always a good thing. Competition is a good thing. But, and this is as someone who doesn't have a dog in this particular fight right now, because I'm not in an observability company, I'm skeptical that all of these different services that they've announced are going to be as good as an integrated offering from a company that's entirely focused on this and is able to build content for it and is able to, kind of do all those other pieces.
Yeah, you talk about hybrid being a thing, and as much as I like to point out that the entire idea is nuts, multi-cloud is also a thing. My infrastructure for my newsletter pipeline is pure AWS, nothing but AWS, and I still pay Epsagon, a third-party monitoring company, because I'm not actively nuts. And well, why wouldn't I use X-Ray or just all the CloudWatch functionality to do this stuff instead? Cool, go use that for one day and then come back and see if you can ask me that question with a straight face and you'll have your answer. It's not what it needs to be. And I don't think that the things that make an awesome monitoring platform are not just platform as a service offerings, but it's SaaS. And AWS generally sucks at SaaS. They don't have a lot of competency in moving up the stack. Every time they try, it kind of ends in disaster. The few times that it tends to seem to work out is when their audience is not someone interacting through a web browser as much, or like I'm very optimistic about Cloud Shell. That's the kind of SaaS I could see them pulling off well. I have a very hard time with looking at, well, I hate to kick something when it's down, but I will. Honeycode is a great example. First, it sounds almost like Honeycomb, and I almost stutter and say that every time I mention it, because, Honeycomb's a company I actually think about on a day-to-day basis. And you take their Honeycode, no-code offering of drag and drop things together, and it's awful. Compare it to any of the other no-code stuff, like Retool and the rest. It's molten garbage. And it's in beta. It'll be better in the fullness of time. Okay, I don't doubt it. I don't doubt you're being honest when you say that, but why does it feel like it's going back to 2016 with another tool to use the stuff that they're releasing today with AWS? And the monitoring and observability piece feels to me like it is, if it doesn't go down that path, I would be remarkably surprised.
Look, we know kind of what life cycle these services go through, right? It's like hype, low, slow adoption. And then over time, they take a relatively small percentage of the overall market. I think that the really big thing that we just heard is observability is past, kind of like it is definitely in major adoption mode. And I remember just 2 or 3 years ago, observability was still a term that we were grappling with. And AWS stating what they believe observability is and, kind of making that relationship between logs, metrics, and traces, I think is going to have a big impact on the industry. Because, say what you will, they do have the ears of a lot of buyers and a lot of users. And so, I think that the good news is, hopefully we'll start seeing more standardization on how all the vendors talk about observability, and buyers will be able to actually have better conversations with their, kind of with their different vendors about whether they're being offered observability or not. Because I think for a long time, observability has been a buzzword and a keyword that people have been, kind of throwing. It's like, oh, I'm going to sprinkle in a little bit of observability into this. It's like, no.
How can we call what we've just been doing for the last 5 years observability now that it's the new buzzword? Yeah.
Yeah. I think that for me, it was the relationship between the logs and, kind of the metrics and being able to have those dependencies there. I think they talked about contributor insights and being able to do that drill down and understand those relationships and how they span across different pieces of infrastructure was really compelling and interesting. And again, we'll see how well implemented these kind of capabilities are. Normally, I think that for the first year, you're a little crazy if you try to adopt them, because they're probably going to work for a very narrow set of use cases. But again, they've put a line in the sand on like, this is what observability is. And I think that you might see even more, like we've already seen a ton of acquisitions happening as some of the monitoring vendors are trying to rebrand themselves as observability, and you're going to continue seeing that pace of acquisitions as they try to build up their war chests into suites that are able to support all of those capability sets.
Yeah, someone in the chat says that, someone in the chat says that they'd love to try Honeycomb, but they don't know how to get management on board in big company. And I think that's a common problem. I mean, like step one, block Charity Major's Twitter feed at the firewall, because honestly, too many truth bombs there that executives aren't going to hear. But my story has always been, when someone says, I don't know how to get management buy-in to use a vendor's product, step one, I'd reach out to that vendor. I'm going to assume that they have more experience with overcoming management reluctance than you will around the specific thing that they do. But that would be my answer, which sounds super intelligent, but let's not kid ourselves here. It's a complete passing of the buck onto someone else, because, well, I can do an introduction, I don't need to actually sell a product. You have a presumably more nuanced take on this.
Well, I mean, I think that tactically you're right. Just, kind of vendors do this every single day. And so we can help. But this is one of those places where I always like to focus on what's the outcome and how does it align to executive, to kind of executive priorities. And the great thing about observability is that it has very, very clear alignment to customer support. It has clear alignment to customer experience. So, things as simple as being able to enable, I've been working with a couple of different observability vendors that I really like. There's one in our portfolio. And ultimately what they've seen really resonate with their customer base is improving the customer experience, improving customer support, and enabling more self-serve amongst the adjacencies to the developer team. And so people often talk about observability as like, oh, it's this thing for the developer team. The reality is that, yes, it's important for the developer team to enable them to operate their applications. But really, it's about enabling all of those adjacent functions to be able to understand when something's happening, why it's happening, and to be able to kind of filter through all the different layers of their infrastructure and to be able to pinpoint those locations. But fortunately, I'm pretty sure AWS is about to spend millions and millions and millions of dollars on just putting observability billboards on, kind of every random highway in America, in a major city, and in the Wall Street Journal. So, what I'd say to that question is like, I think they're going to take care of you, because pretty soon there's going to be an AWS rep talking to your CTO saying observability, observability, observability.
True. I feel like the only reason that AWS hasn't jumped on that is not because there's not inventory right now. Buying billboards that no one's looking at is very on brand for them. But I feel like the real problem is they can't find a good way to make their partners pay for those billboards. But, they're innovating rapidly, and I have no doubt that they'll get there. Fault injection simulator, also known as let's try and kill Gremlin. In theory, in practice, we're basically killing every reason you'd have to wind up trusting an Azure data center. What's your take on that? I think it's easy to look at it and say, oh, they're just competing with all of the vendors that have mind share. What's your take? I'd like to call it FFS instead of FIS, as half the internet immediately misread it the first time they showed it. But what do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think if you're going to, I think it's really smart on AWS's side, because like, why don't you just tell us when you're going to take down the machine so that we can reboot the virtualized instance? Like, it's a great idea. I feel it's a little bit like Nerd Christmas right now, because I'm watching this and I'm like, observability, chaos engineering, like Werner just spent literally half his keynote talking about those two things, which 5 years ago, no one was talking about. I don't know when Gremlin was started. I think it was 2015, 2016, something like that. So I don't think this is going to kill Gremlin. I think Gremlin has a much, I love the guys there, and I think they have a much broader service than the fault injection simulation. I do think it's going to have a big slap in the face to Azure. Because if you're not doing chaos engineering today, or you don't have a plan for doing chaos engineering, then what are you doing, right? Like it's pretty obvious that you need to practice. And we focus all of our time on outages and kind of helping people with a lot of these DevOps processes. And if you've never trained anyone on it, and you've never practiced, and you have no tooling supporting it, and it's just living in a really, really sad old kind of Confluence page somewhere that no one's ever reviewed, then you're foolish if you think that people are going to remember that set of steps and know how to bring back infrastructure when kind of things go bump in the night at 3 a.m. So I think they're promoting really, really good practices. Now, is it going to work? How well is it going to work? Are they going to have, because like if you think about Gremlin's offering, Gremlin's offering has a lot of support around these things because, half of it is technology, half of it is process and process adoption and process recording and, kind of being able to do all those steps around it. And again, back to AWS isn't great at SaaS apps. I don't know how much they've done around the metrics, the analytics, all of that stuff around it, or if they've just made it so that you can click a button and take down your infrastructure in one fell swoop.
Well, you've always had that feature. It just, people didn't realize it's what they were doing. I mean, our friend in the chat is trying to get buy-in for observability. Like, if it's a hard sell to management to really instrument and understand what's going on in your environment, coming back with the chaos engineering pitch feels like that times 10. Like, so let me get this straight. You want to start breaking things on purpose. It's like, well, technically, no. I'd like to be called a chaos engineer. So I'd want to start breaking things on purpose, and I'd like a raise while you're at it. And it just seems like it's one of those things that on its face sounds patently ridiculous. Let's be clear. It is incredibly valuable and highly recommended for anyone who cares about reliability. But it's not the most intuitive conversation the first time someone hears about it.
But you can schedule it now, so it's that's going to change everything. It's going to take a while for this to really hit the mainstream. I think observability is much farther in the adoption curve than chaos engineering is. Gremlin's still a kind of early company, and you never know with AWS. Maybe they leave it and this is it, and it becomes kind of some feature that a few enterprising people are able to use to build their own Gremlin, but. Yeah, I think that what's more interesting is how much Werner is starting to push these things that have been part of the reliability canon as core AWS principles. It feels like they're making more and more of a stand on this is what DevOps looks like and this is how you're supposed to do DevOps. Which is new for them. They've been the place that will give you all the tools and let you stab yourself in many, many, many different ways. But that doesn't mean that they've told you how you should do things. And I feel like they're starting to get more and more prescriptive, which is good because they have so many damn examples of people doing things and failing on their platform, including themselves. So I, for one, welcome AWS starting to give us more guidance and starting to tell us a little bit more on how we should be running on their infrastructure.
Oh my God, yes. It feels like there's been a spectrum where on the one end for a long time you've had Google that likes to come down from their ivory tower and tell all of us how we should run our environments with always the unspoken, like basically how to stab yourself with this stuff. Like step one, buy a $20 billion knife. And we're not going to call that out. It's just going to be assumed baked into the rest of it. And whereas on the other side of the spectrum, you have AWS, it's like, oh, we stab ourselves differently. Can't tell you anything about how or why or what. And it leads to this very weird disjoint between tech companies where for some folks trying everyone to just be like us. It's a very thinly veiled recruiting pitch. And other folks are, well, that's internal. I mean, one of the most depressing things that new hires at Amazon have reported has been that when they get there, they're expecting this magic candy factory. And nope, it's a lot like at other companies. They just nail the execution parts of it, which they find depressing. I find super encouraging. Because it means you don't need to be this far future wizard who is smarter than everyone else. Just ask me. This is something that anyone could theoretically do if they just had the will to do it. And I find that way more encouraging than I do sad.
Yeah, it is very different than GCP. Like, hey, we're going to take all of our magical dev tools and hand them over to you. Good luck operating them. They might not work, but we use them. So if you can't use them, then that says more about you than it does about us. AWS has been notably silent on a lot of these things on the operations side, and I think a lot of people assume it's because they're really secretive. I've spoken to a lot of AWS engineers. I know the truth, which is like they've been suffering through it and just kind of hacking it to make it work, just like everyone else. The fact that they spent so much of this keynote talking about this tells me that they're hearing that from a lot of their users. And they didn't really spend a lot of time talking about new developer services. They didn't spend a lot of time talking about it new, kind of they spent a little bit of time talking about Graviton, and Andy talked about more of that during his keynote. But yeah, like this was the year of ops. So maybe there's awareness internally that AWS isn't as easy to manage as everyone else thinks, and them turning more of their focus on that instead of just spitting out more and more and more services is going to be good for the industry.
Yeah, I assumed that they thought I would be busy watching the keynote and wouldn't notice this. But while Werner was talking, they announced 3 new services for Systems Manager. Systems Manager Application Manager, Systems Manager Fleet Manager, and Systems Manager Change Manager, because I've been so gentle to them for Systems Manager Session Manager's naming. And it's like someone is doubling down on that or phoning it in or what. At some point we look at this and it's, wow, you have all these manager services reporting to Systems Manager, and it's not getting promoted to Systems Director, presumably because they're modeling it after a woman in tech, where you're not supposed to be promoted until you're doing well beyond the job and then demand it and rage quit very publicly. I don't know what they're doing from a naming convention, because I love Systems Manager. The entire suite is super awesome, and the naming is so bad. I have a hard time recommending it on that basis alone.
When do you think they're going to introduce Cloud Economist Manager, where they basically just offer you as a service?
Part of me wonders, on some level, I've got to be direct. When I first started doing AWS billing as an independent consultant 4 years ago, I was terrified that they were going to fix the billing system and effectively put me out of a job. And 4 years later, now I'm scared they never will. Because at first it was, well, yeah, that's why I'm not doing a product, I'm doing a service, because I can pivot that when they release a feature that just eviscerates everything that I do. The problem is that billing becomes this nuanced, deep problem space. And there's no answer to that's tooling specific that's going to solve all of this. Tools can absolutely help, and it should be way bigger than it is. But the problems I find myself helping customers with, they're people problems. And that's something that software doesn't do a terrific job of addressing. Someone in the chat says, I want you to put me out of business. Yes, I have given them roadmaps in various forms of how to put me out of business across every axis of what I do. Including giving things terrible names. And then you can make fun of yourselves more effectively than I can make fun of you. My job here is done. But at no point do I want to be doing the same thing I'm doing now, 10 years in the future.
I think it's the same thing with all of the other services we were talking about, though, right? Like, the reason that Datadog isn't going to go out of business tomorrow and that Honeycomb isn't going to go out of business is that there's domain expertise. There's, kind of things that happen up the value chain beyond just the service itself that those vendors know on, being able to provide a service to their customers. And that service includes having knowledge and domain knowledge and knowing how these things intersect. And, kind of in the case of Datadog, having a lot of pre-built content that gets you started a lot more quickly. And this is the area that's always been AWS's Achilles heel. And the reason why every time they try to make an inroad into the ops or, kind of more management area, they have lots of great tools, but imagine trying to explain to someone today what tools they need in order to be able to monitor, to build a full observability suite around AWS. I have some things written down here. So I'm going to need my managed Grafana and Prometheus. I'm going to need my AWS distro for open telemetry. I'm going to need contributor insights. It's like 5, 6, 7 different services just on any one piece of functionality, and nothing gluing those together, I'm sure. A lot of really arcane documentation and configuration pages. So So, it's the same reason why they're not going to put you out of business. They don't want to. And I don't think that they're going to be able to put any of these other guys out of business either.
No, I hope not. And again, I think it's an easy trope to say that, oh, AWS started offering a thing that we do and then it killed our company. Find me an example of that, because I really see it difficult. I really don't see it happening. The closest example I've got are folks that, to be blunt, kind of should really know better. The single one I pull up is RightScale, where back when I first saw EC2 back in 2008 or so, they wound up having this incredibly complex console that was difficult to understand if you hadn't worked with this before. RightScale acted as a shim and made it much more understandable. I don't know that I would build an entire product around, well, that one console is super crappy, and I'm sure that they will never, ever fix that and make for a better customer experience. If you want to go down that path, you've got to keep innovating ahead of the bow wave that AWS casts up in front of it. It seemed like RightScale had one great idea, and then they held still for a long time. Then they got acquired by Flexera. Then I think Flexera just got acquired by someone else, and there's always a bigger fish. And now, apparently, the only thing that's left of them is putting out the State of the Cloud report in the first quarter of every year that's badly researched, doesn't understand the questions it's asking, and has a bunch of dumb conclusions as a result. As you can tell, I'm quite the fan.
Yeah, like they always do this stuff though, right? Like I remember when they first started offering Elastic as a managed service, and like that really sassy public note that came out from the Elastic management team, where they basically pointed fingers at AWS for coasting on their on a lot of hard work of a lot of people by taking a service that they were already offering for an open source component. And then, they've done that again and again and again on the open source side. They just did it today for Grafana and Prometheus. Is that really, is that going to kill those companies? Probably not. I mean, Elastic is still around, they keep trying, but it turns out it takes more than just systems. There's people, there's process, there's lots of other pieces to this that are not just the technology itself. And again, their Achilles heel. They seem to think that you can just kind of slap a little bit of ML on it. I found his comments really funny. Oh, I'm really getting into machine learning, and I'm like, cool. That's good to know. I guess you've discovered machine learning. And it almost seemed like he was preparing to announcing DevOps for sale, right? Buy a DevOps. How many DevOps do you want to buy? We'll sell them to you backed by our machine learning engine. And it's unreal.
When someone tells me they're getting deep into machine learning, I'm torn. Do I want to make fun of them, or do I want to scam them out of money? It's really hard to figure out what direction to go in sometimes.
Well, I mean, that's why you're not a vendor. Vendors.
No, I would be a terrible vendor.
It's a pretty easy decision if you're on the vendor side for most people.
I'm waiting until they start calling it DevML Ops. I'm sure that'll be next along the chain as they continue to wind up coming up with ridiculous names for the same job.
Yeah, I like that. SecDevML Ops. It rolls off the tongue.
Absolutely. So, in all, I think that it was a great keynote. At the end, he wound up talking rather extensively about the meeting customers where they are. It's a phrase I've been kicking around for a long time, because it was always depressing when you see people get on stage and talk about their amazing stuff that they're doing. In fact, I'm going to call one out now. The Lego group got up and talked about all the serverless awesome stuff they're doing. But I will bet you anything you'd like that if I were to pull the Lego group's bill, they are not a customer. I don't actually know the answer to this. Let's be very clear on this. But if I were to pull their bill, there would almost certainly be a big pile of EC2 instances, a bunch of traditional databases, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because people talk aspirationally about aspects of what they do. In practice, there's always going to be something that is nowhere near as far along and as evolved. No one likes to get on stage and talk about their failures. So meeting customers where they are and not making them feel like jerks for not having evolved at a Google-like pace is absolutely not the outcome anyone wants. But it's been the unintentional outcome that we've seen for a while now at a bunch of different conferences. And I really like the fact that Werner took the time to wind up reassuring people of that and how important it is. You still need to evolve, but it is a process. It's not a destination. And again, your goal is to solve something that works for your business needs, not that looks great on a keynote stage.
Yeah, I liked hearing that. And I think he means it. I think that's why you saw the focus on all of these ops things. Because if you go, I talk to CIOs and CTOs and VPs of engineering every single day. And it's not that programming is a solved problem. You know, there's a lot of things that are still to be built. But if you look at the complexity and the skills gap on operating all of this stuff, it is like that's really where the burning fire is for teams right now. And it's why you see such a rise in companies adopting SRE, companies moving over to DevOps models. Everyone's trying to figure out, how do I run things like Amazon? How do I run things like Google and scale this out? And it turns out that those guys didn't have any secret sauce. They just had a lot of bodies and a lot of really smart people that they papered over a lot of the problems with. And AWS has a lot of, they've got to catch up on a lot of this stuff, because while they've put out a lot of innovations over the last few years on the developer side, on the operating side, they really haven't been playing in the big leagues, and they've been leaving that to a lot of other vendors. So I found that really promising from Werner as an AWS customer. I'm excited because I'm like, great. I'm sure that our SRE Michael is taking a look at a lot of these new services and thinking about how we might implement them to support our customers. And yeah, I'm generally positive on his perspective. You're right. Like, if you look at the workloads, there's modern applications that people are able to move over to, kind of more of the serverless model these days. And Lego Story was really inspiring, and that they took such a comprehensive approach to it. But most organizations still have a lot of workloads that are running on EC2 instances. They're running a lot of legacy code that they have to host themselves, and oftentimes it's really important code. It's code for the business side and for the rest of the business. And so I'm sure that if you looked at any of these companies' bills, the serverless side is going to be a pretty small portion of their overall bill, except for a few.
Oh yeah, legacy is always dismissive engineer speak for it makes money. So I'm not terribly concerned about that. Again, I'm an ops person. I'm very conservative about a lot of these things. Things like disk volumes and file systems and the data. Mistakes are going to show. It's important to have something that addresses and the respect for that. I don't care what you talk about with Agile and how advanced you are. Everyone does waterfall when it comes to the payment system, I promise you. And there's good reason for that. It's mistakes that show on your customers' credit card balances are like the worst kinds of mistakes. That's like the only one worse is the mistakes that show on the front page of the New York Times.
I talked to someone I haven't heard too much about I've obviously been following along with a lot of the reInvent announcements, but the only one that a customer brought up to me was better pricing on some instances that can run SAP. So it tells you where people are getting excited from this current set of announcements. As much as we like to kind of talk about observability and the future and chaos engineering and all that stuff, I think it's still very, very early days.
The only thing I know about SAP HANA is that they have dedicated instances for it that have 24 terabytes of RAM, and that tells me all that I need to know about SAP HANA. It is not for me. It's
wild.
And that's the trick too, is that all these things that get announced, they are for customers, but not everything is for every customer. And that's something that I think is easy to lose sight of.
Yeah, they've done a really good job with this year's keynote of compartmentalizing it more than ever, because you can just go listen to the ones that are relevant to you. So I listened to some of the ML one, and there was a bunch of stuff, but it certainly doesn't have the thrill of everyone being crammed into the same space and kind of
thrill. Yes, that's what we referred to it as.
I miss my little boxed sandwich lunch. I have fond memories of eating those on the rug next to the cafeteria.
Yeah, I tend to mostly just forget to eat during reInvent, which is great. It's like, this is so awesome, I'm getting lightheaded. Wait, that might not be the service announcement that's doing it. I made the mistake of assuming that everything was going to be like in-person reInvent, so I ran like crazy week 1, and now week 3, I'm vaguely forgetting, my children's names. So I'm hoping that I get a chance to take a little bit of a break here, but we'll see. Divannys, thank you so much for taking the time to suffer my slings, arrows, etc. And of course, worst of all, ill-informed opinions. If people want to learn more, where can they find you?
Transposit.com. We are one of those vendors that's trying to make DevOps and reliability engineering a thing for people and make it easier for them to adopt. So if you are having any problems on the reliability engineering side, you need help on automating processes, reach
And
out
that's
to
everyone, to be clear.
It's pretty much everyone. But I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. I'm sure that there's some team out there that has just like perfected this. And if so, please reach out to me because I'd love to learn from you.
Well, that's not how we do it at Google. Yeah, there's always going to be that story. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. It's appreciated. And thank you to everyone who both listened and tolerated our ridiculous AV challenges today, because nothing is simple in a time of COVID. I'll talk to you soon. There's going to be more of these coming later in the week to talk about different things that AWS has done and make fun of them from different angles.